Is advertising dead? First, advertising, defined as the act to induce the public to buy a product or service, is not dead. The direct response advertising era has come to an end if you define it as a message crafted to push a sale by interrupting the public. Let's take a quick look to the history of advertising. In the 1700s, the invention of the press and the newspapers let brands use ads on the content by interrupting the reader as they were reading. It was a way to make the press profitable. Obviously, the audience was annoyed, but they learned to cope with it. Then, in the 1900s, the invention of the radio allowed marketeers to put messages in a new medium, but now with sound. Interesting fact, Marconi wanted to make the radio private by selling subscriptions, something like Spotify, iTunes, or Pandora, but a new treaty made the radio publicly available. So the radio broadcasters turned to the old same advertising model that was working on newspapers and magazines. Then, in the 40s, the television came along, and guess what? The interrupting method was adopted. The audience was used to be interrupted. But in the 80s, cable and the internet hurt the broadcast world. Television and radio networks had to find new ways to interrupt the public to let the brands put their messages out. Then, in this new century, with the introduction of broadband video, things started to change. People had the power to skip commercials, first on TiVo, then on YouTube. But the model was being the same, interrupting the audience. The Netflix came along and let the users pay to avoid commercials. This caused a disruption to the interrupting method. People were able to pay to avoid being interrupted. Other networks adopted the same model, such as HBO, YouTube Red, and so on. So, after more than 200 years, the control is now in the audience, and only a click away. What's the future? Let's think. What was the ads interrupted? Stories. Stories on newspapers, on radio, on television, and the internet. So, brands should turn to and learn from storytelling. Storytelling are life lessons. You have to learn from the mistakes you did and overcome your obstacles. Brands interrupted the audience all the time and annoyed them as a result. But what they actually needed was to change their own core method. Instead of interrupting, they need to become the opposite. They have to become the stories that people want to watch. The answer was always there. Advertising has to evolve. Brands have to aim their efforts into storytelling. Storytelling is an art in it by itself. The story is not just content creation. The story is not a testimonial. The story is not a chronological tale. The story is not a cheap reality show. Storytelling is connecting to the core symbolic values of the human essence. Storytelling helps us make sense of our existence. Story helps us survive. Storytelling is a mirror of the human struggle. If you're a brand, a marketeer, or an influencer, be part of the stories we want to watch if you want to survive. We live now in an economy where attention is a new currency. What are you going to do as a brand, marketeer, or influencer to get the audience attention? Use story and share with us what we strive for. Become part of the new history of advertising.